Hello everyone, nice to see you back. We are with a chapter called Interface Python with MySQL and a very important chapter. Okay. Now what do I mean by Interface Python with MySQL? Okay. In class 11 and in class 12, you must have learned some MySQL commands or the SQL commands that help you to communicate with MySQL. Then in class 11 and class 12, you learned how to do Python programming. Here we are going to be connecting Python and MySQL, or you're going to be, allowing them to communicate with each other. Now, why do we need to do this? In real world scenarios, I'm sure in all applications that we see, whether it's companies or banks or airlines, they must be storing data. Data could be data of employees, data of students, data of flights, data of, banking details. All this data, they must be storing it in a database. Okay. But they must be programming it using another application. Okay. So basically we come across two terms, the front end and the back end. Back end is the location where your data is stored, or the database that I could talk about. Okay. Whereas the front end is the application that the user communicates with. So basically the user is only going to be communicating with the front end application, but data is going to be stored and retrieved from the back end or at the back end. Is that clear? Okay. So in real world scenarios or in this real world, we will have to store details in a database. Like in a school, for example, don't we store the details of all the students in a database? Correct? Now, everybody cannot be learning SQL command because they want to work with database. So what happens is we write or we make a program in any programming language which is used as a front end where the user interacts. So the user need not be giving commands. The user must be only providing, contents or details required, and your front end program communicates with your back end program. Okay, so in this case, we are going to be using something called the MySQL connector. Now, what is the MySQL connector's role? I could say it's an intermediator between the two applications. Remember one thing, Python and MySQL are two different applications. Okay, so what is the MySQL connector doing? It is allowing both these applications to talk to each other. Talk to each other means communicate with each other. Now, can you see some arrows going to the right as well as to the left? What does it mean? You are going to be transferring certain things from your Python program to MySQL, and you are going to be getting data or anything from MySQL into your Python program. And who is helping with this connection is a software called MySQL connector. Is that clear? Okay, now before we actually start with the database connectivity, that means connect front end to a back end, we have to keep some certain steps in mind. These are the steps you must follow to have database connectivity. Okay, let me see those steps. What are the steps for, fetching or connecting to a database? First thing is you will have to install the Python's MySQL connector. So whether you're using the Spider IDE, whether you're using the idle IDE, whichever IDE you are using, you will have to install, because this is not coming with the Python package. Okay, you will have to separately, or I say explicitly, install the Python MySQL connector on your computer before you can connect Python to MySQL. Now, from your program point of view, what is the first thing you will do is import the required package, and the package is going to be named as mysql.connector. So if you ever want to connect Python to MySQL, you are going to be importing this particular package. Now remember, this particular package is not like your math or your random modules which were already existing. These your import mysql.connector line will only work provided you have installed or done the first step, installed the Python MySQL connector. Clear? So after I import the required package, in this scenario, the required module is mysql.connector. I have to write lines to set up a connection between Python and MySQL. And for that, I'm making use of a function called connect of the module MySQL.connector. So I would want to take you to that function and just tell you what each element means there. So I'm making use of a function called connect, which belongs to the module called MySQL.connector. So what is this function requiring as parameters? Host. Host means where is your MySQL? Now, for most of us or for student level, definitely your MySQL and your Python program are on your same computer. So in that scenario, you write the word local host. That means Python and MySQL are at the same, not necessarily the location, but maybe on my laptop, maybe on my desktop, but it's on the same computer. If your MySQL server was on some other computer, then you could write the IP address of that computer in the host section. So the first parameter is host. Local host for student level, definitely, because you all are going to be having, you're not connecting one computer to another, right? You all are going to be having your MySQL server also on the same computer as your Python program. Now, user. If you have created usernames in MySQL and you're working with that username, you specify the username. Generally, we don't create a username. So for all of us, the username would be root. So if you have not created a user on MySQL, remember the username is going to be root. Coming to the password. Password is when you installed MySQL, it would have asked you to specify a password while installing. So what is that password is what you're going to be typing here. Coming to database name. Now I am trying to connect my Python program to one of the databases in MySQL. What is the name of that database? That you specify as a parameter for database. So whatever is your database name. Now this method or this function called connect that I'm talking about, what will it do? Once it sets up a connection or it opens up a connection from Python to MySQL, it will give all the details of the connection to something called a connection object. So this is just a variable name. You could write A, B, C, whatever. So the details of the connection are going to be returned to the connection object. So in my program, the connection object is important for me because it's the connection object which tells me how my Python was connected to MySQL. Is that clear? Okay, so this is about getting, so first remember to install. Every time you don't need to install. Once you have installed, all your programs will actually start from step 2 is import MySQL.connector module, and then make use of the connect function of that module to set up a connection between Python and MySQL. Is that clear? Okay. Then what do you need to do? Then you need to do is create a cursor object. Okay. So now because it's the cursor object which allows me to send SQL commands to the database. Now remember, MySQL is an RDBMS, and an RDBMS works with a language called SQL. So you will be sending SQL commands from Python program to MySQL by making use of the cursor object. So before I actually send the SQL command, I need to create the cursor object. And that is what is shown in step number 4. How do I create the cursor object? I'm making use of a function called cursor of my connection. Now, what is my connection? Here, my connection is the name of the connection object. Okay, there I wrote connection object. Here I've given you an example of a connection object. So if your connection object was my connection, you would write my connection.cursor. If your connection object was C, you would write C.cursor. So the cursor method or the cursor function is allowing me to create a cursor object. Give any name to your cursor object. But it is this cursor object that allows me to send SQL commands from Python to MySQL by making use of a function called execute. So it's the execute function of the cursor object that allows me to send any SQL command that you have learned when you studied MySQL using this statement. Now, there are some SQL commands which when you send to the your database or MySQL, it gives me an answer. So if it gives me an answer, the next thing I'll have to do is learn how to extract that values or that data from the result set. Now, what is a result set? Result set is nothing but the answer that MySQL has sent back to the Python application. And where is that result set going to be stored? It is going to be referred by the cursor object. So the cursor object is going to be referring to the result set. Remember, always I'm not going to get a result set. For example, if I issue a select command, I have an answer. But if I issue an insert command, there is no answer. There is only something happening. So in case you are going to be getting a result set back from MySQL into your Python application, then you must extract the data from the result set, probably to display it to the user. And that is step number 6. So you are not necessarily going to be seeing step number 6 all the time. Only if your command that you have typed is giving me an answer, we will be doing step number 6. And finally, when you finish working with your connectivity and if you've got your answers or you've sent the result, SQL command or brought in the SQL command, then you need to, close your connection. You've opened your connection using the connect function. Now you have to close the connection and clean up the environment. And that is done by writing the name of the connection object dot close. So if your connection object, like I showed you here, is the name, if you've named it as MyCon, you will be writing MyCon, you will be writing MyCon dot close. Is that clear? So I hope you understood. Remember to install the connector. Then that is only once, okay, not for every program. Then for every program, import MySQL.connector, first thing. Second thing is get the connection done using the connect function. Third, create the cursor object, because it is the cursor object that will help me to send SQL commands. And how do I send SQL commands is by making use of a function called execute that you see on the screen here, making use of the function called execute. Now, when you send an SQL command, you may or may not get an answer back. If you're getting an answer back, then we will have to learn how to extract the data from the result set. And for that, we are going to be using 3 functions called fetch one, fetch all, and fetch many. I will be showing it to you when we actually work on Spider IDE. And once you're done with your database connectivity and you've got your answers and you've displayed what you have to display, you have to close the connection and clean up the environment. And that is done by writing the name of your connection object dot close. Now, if you think all these things, look too complicated, do not worry. You are just going to see that in Spider IDE, how do I exactly do all these things? And it's going to be very easy. Only those lines you have to learn, those steps you have to learn, the SQL command we've already learned. It will keep varying from question to question, depending upon what you want to do. Clear? So let's move to the Spider IDE. In the previous slides, we just saw how do we connect Python to MySQL, but we've just learned the theory part of it. Now I've brought you to the MySQL and the Spider IDE screen to actually show you how do we connect Python application to a database or MySQL database. Okay, so before that, I would just want to show you that I have created a database named as company in MySQL. Okay. And I have created a table named as EMP, okay, in that database, and this is my EMP table. So basically, in my example, I'm just trying to be connecting to the database named as company, and I'll be working with the table called EMP. So as of now, you can see I have how many records there? I have 5 records, 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105. Okay, so let's revise the steps we learned in the previous slide. It first said that I have to install MySQL connector. That I have done. Step 2 said that you had to import the required package. So I have imported the required package. Step 3 said that you have to establish or open a connection between MySQL and Python. So this is the line that helps me to open a connection between MySQL and Python. And which function am I using? I'm using a function named as connect. Now I just showed you that I have a database called company. Okay. My username in MySQL is root and my password is school. And the connection object that I'm creating here is, I have named it as MyCon, like it's a variable, remember? So you can just name it with whatever name you want to give. After creating the connection object, the next step said you create a cursor. So I've created a cursor as shown here. Now, this cursor object is basically the whole importance of a cursor object here is that when you get the answer back from SQL into Python, the cursor object allows you to fetch one row at a time or move across each row of the result set. So what is a result set? The answer that was fetched from the database and the answer that is sent to Python. Is that clear? Okay. So now I want to display all the records of the EMP table. So I write SQL command, which is select star from EMP. And then we have learned which statement allows me to actually send SQL command to the database or to MySQL is the execute function. Now, I could have written the SQL command at this location, directly the SQL command, but here what did I do? I just wrote the name of the variable because the variable is storing my SQL command. Okay, now when you execute this, whatever is the result of this command, now in this scenario, all the contents, but whatever your select command could be anything, right? We have seen variety of select commands in when we learned MySQL. So whatever is the result of your SQL or your MySQL, that's called the result set. That result set is returned back to my cursor. So my cursor helps you to, move across each record of your result set. Okay, now, so with this line, everything that I had to get from your database or your MySQL has reached the cursor. Now what do I do? From the cursor, I either pick one record, only one record, that is by using your next step was extract the records, right? So extract the data. So either I can pick up only one record, the first record, the second record, whatever, by using a function named as fetch one using the cursor object. Or I could say fetch all, or I could say fetch many. I would want to show you all of them, all the three, what do they exactly do. So I write my data is equal to my cursor. My cursor is the name of my cursor object, dot, because these functions that I'm talking about belong to the my cursor object. Okay, dot fetch one. Okay, let me just tell you what happens with fetch one. In this scenario, I would not want to use fetch one and I would want to use fetch all, but I'm just trying to show you what exactly happens. Okay, so the entire record has come into or is pointed by my cursor, but you are only fetching one record. So it will fetch the first record for me as of now. And where is it storing? It is storing in my data. Okay, so if I say print my data, okay, let's see exactly what I get. Okay, you remember my employee numbers were 101, 102, so I should get the record of 101. Okay, so let's just run the program and see what's happening. Okay, it's asking me to save. Okay, let me just save it. Okay, it will take some time. We realize that when I'm doing it for the first time, okay, it takes some time. And not only that, here we're trying to get connected from Python to MySQL. So you will see that small delay there. Okay, so can you see you have got the first record here, correct? Now the record has come to you as a tuple. Okay, that's because you have only fetched one record. Each record is going to be returned as a tuple. But When you have many records, okay, now here it's fetch one. But if you're going to be fetching more than one record, then each record comes as a tuple, but your my data will not be of type tuple, it will be a list. So it will be a list of tuples. I will show you there. So can you see it's just fetched one record? Okay, let's assume that I write this line once again. Okay, so it should fetch the first record, then I'm again saying fetch, so it should fetch the second record. Okay, so let me just run the program. Okay, so can you see the first record as well as the second record? Okay, so fetch one, what is it doing? It is only fetching one record from the cursor object or from the result set, because the cursor object is referring to the result set. Is that clear? Okay, now instead of this, suppose I wrote fetch all. Okay, suppose I wrote fetch all and then I displayed print my data. I displayed print my data. Okay, let's see what happens. Can you see all the records are fetched and each record is a tuple? Each record is a tuple, but can you see the square bracket here and the square bracket at the end? That means all the records have been fetched, each record as a tuple, and they are in a list. So all these records are a part of the list. So the list consists of many tuples and each of these tuples mean a record. But what if I want to, now this is just displaying everything. What if I want to display one record at a time? Okay, one record at a time. Then we know that my data is now nothing but a list. So what could I do? I could loop over it. How do I do that? I could have written for X in my data and print X. We have learned how do we loop through a list. So I loop through a list. So here it will show me one record at a time, one below the other, as you see here. Can you see? So the whole idea is, previously also I got the entire record. Now also I got the entire record. But previously I got the entire record into a list and I displayed that entire record. So there is no formatting as such. But if I want to look at one record at a time or something like that, I could just loop through my data, which is nothing but a list, and display the records. Is that clear? So did you understand how fetch all works? Okay, but remember one thing, one important thing. People think fetch one, fetch all, and fetch many are fetching from the MySQL database. No. It's fetching from the cursor. The fetching from the MySQL database or the getting from the MySQL database was already done by the execute command. So actually the entire record has come to your Python program or Python application. From here, I am fetching either all the records or one record, or what does fetch many do? So if I write fetch many, in fetch many, you need to specify many means what? 2 records, 3 records. So suppose I say 3. So what will happen? It will fetch at a time the 3 records. And because I've just got the data and the cursor is at the beginning, so it just fetches the first 3 records. Okay, so let me just run this for you. Can you see? I have got just the first 3 records. But if I execute fetch this once again, let's say I just copy it here. Okay, and now if I say fetch 2, okay, and then display, see what is going to happen. I got all the 5 records, right? Why? Because first 3 records were fetched by fetch many in bracket 3. The next 2 records were fetched by fetch many in bracket 2. Is that clear? So what is the difference between fetch 1, fetch many, and fetch all? I hope it's clear. So fetch all will fetch all the records from the cursor object, and then you can loop through it and display it. Fetch one will fetch only one record at a time, but if you keep saying fetch one, fetch one, fetch one, first record, second record, the cursor will keep moving. And what does fetch many do? At a time, if you want to fetch only 2 records or 3 records, something like that, and not all the records, then you can make use of fetch many. Is that clear? So with this, you saw I am in Python, but I am getting the data from MySQL, which means what? Python has been connected or is connected to MySQL using your MySQL connector. Clear? Okay.